Morning all. Remember during the first stages of COVID and the lockdowns, when some wags were posting um, things like, "How are you during your first 3 months introductory offer of communism?" And it seemed like an intellectual thing then. Um, Lockdowns were happening, but people were they were complying. I mean, I complied first. I just we weren't sure how dangerous this thing was, and we thought, well, all right, let's uh, better be safe than sorry, we thought. And then it contorted into this kind of totalitarianism, which made me first worry with the behaviour of the police force. I mean, I didn't really protest against the lockdowns for any um, sort of principled reason, but only because of the way the police were behaving. And they seemed to be enjoying it so much, and it looked as if this would be the sort of thing that they could get quite comfortable with. The idea that they can tell people where they can go and who they can be with and what times they can be out. And I thought that we can't have this. And the papers, and then the vaccine passport, the Papers, Please Society. And I mean, that was somewhat later, but I was still quite astonished by how many people would go along with it. Um, and now we've had a month of, just over a month of Keir Starmer's Labour government, um, effectively an unopposed Labour government now with a massive parliamentary majority. Not that having an opposition meant that we had an opposition when Starmer was in opposition, um, and that kind of tells its own story. Um, but on our side of the fence, we've been telling people for some time that totalitarianism is coming, and our concerns have been brushed aside. You're overreacting. It's every day, your everyday life doesn't look like it's a tyranny. You go outside, the lights are still on. Yeah, you turn the tap on, the water still runs. Um, None of your friends have been arrested for things they put on Facebook or jailed. So it seems like an intellectual thing. It seems that something is something that is only happening on the internet. But for that young chap that got 36 months or 38 months, more than 3 years, um, for posting something on Facebook or Twitter, was it? That's not just going to happen on the internet. He's in jail now. His life is ruined. I mean, perhaps not ruined forever, but I understand he's got 3 children. How are they going to survive without him? They probably will survive, but but probably only survive. Um, and then that kind of thing has the intended effect. It apparently only had 20 followers and it only had 9 likes, and now he's gone to jail for 3 years. You know, I think he's in his mid 20s yet, mid 20s now. He's going to be almost 30 by the time he gets out. Um, and it has the desired effect of making you wonder whether you'll be getting a knock on the door. But to the normies, that's not a problem because the normies will comply with everything. This is the thing: is that the totalitarianism doesn't come overnight. I mean, it's been pretty close to becoming overnight, um, from our point of view. But to the normies, who comply with everything and do everything that the government tells them to, they'll never recognise totalitarianism. They'll never recognise it for what it is. I fully, uh, I'm fully convinced that Germans in 1935, um, I'm sure most of them didn't know what was coming. And then, as now, most of them will comply. Most of them complied. And whilst they denied what was happening in front of their eyes, they were dragged to hell. The road to totalitarianism is lined with people telling you not to overreact. That was the line, wasn't it? And I think this is what is the real danger here: is that Britain has been a pretty free country for, you know, it, even in the least flattering way of saying has been a pretty free country for almost 100 years, and it was freer than most other places for probably a couple of 100 years before that. And I've argued for a long time that because of that, our complacency makes us vulnerable in the way that perhaps Germany and Japan and even Russia is not, and the other countries in the Eastern Europe are not complacent. They're not vulnerable because some of this stuff is still in living memory for them. And I've hoped that people will see what's happening and they will begin to wake up, and many have. But this latest, spasm with the riots and the really quite brutal crackdown on people who have never done anybody any harm, and the way their words have been elevated to become to equate with real violence. This idea that words are violent. I mean, this has been coming for a long time. Um, the first crack in the principle of freedom of speech was um, the the law that came in, I think, in 1965, incitement to racial hatred, which was like so many other things, was brought in for um, the best of reasons, so that black people didn't get racially abused on the street, and it's difficult to say that was a bad thing, but this is where wisdom comes in, and this is where the wisdom of people who know that once that principle is punctured, it's only a matter of time before there are more and more incursions on it until it becomes meaningless. It's quite obvious that there isn't freedom of speech in this country any longer. Um, I mean, that's been true for some time, but what's disappointing, what's terrifying about this is the amount of people who think it's justified. Oh, you can't say that because it's hate speech. Oh, we can't have hate speech. And the people who agree with the idea of hate speech, it's difficult to know whether they actually really believe in the concept of hate speech, or is it just because they just want to win. I suspect it's just because they want to win, and they are still following this caricature of the racist bogeyman. You've got to fight the racists. All those, pathetic counter marches, supposedly as a response to the 100 um, far right marches that were supposedly planned, which I'd never heard about. I didn't hear about it until supposedly a day beforehand, and I remember thinking, well, why is that? Doesn't sound like um, that doesn't sound very genuine to me. Um, and the way the newspapers, as usual, um, they all parroted exactly the same line, almost with exactly the same words. And when that happens, that isn't organic. That's government got in there. So you've got to put out a headline saying this. But this complacency is kind of a normality bias. We look out at the world and it looks the same as it did yesterday. It doesn't look like a tyranny, and we've never had tyranny. So we assume that we're never going to have it. But Weimar Germany was one of the freest societies on earth at the time. It was quite licentious, perhaps, which might have been part of the backlash, I suppose. Um, but they didn't see it coming. I'm sure they didn't see it coming. And it's difficult to concentrate on anything else when so much of this stuff is going on all the time. It's difficult to concentrate on work, on family. You know, it's difficult to be entertained in any real sense because you know what's behind everything. I mean, as I've said before, is I always used to love a good spy film, but now I just to me the security service are just pathetic peeping toms. They're not secret warriors fighting on our behalf, doing a dirty job on our behalf. You know, and many of us said that it was going to have to get worse before it got better, and now it is getting worse. It's getting much worse, much more quickly than I realised, and I imagine it's the same for many of you. But one thing you have to remember, of course, is that, and this is something I think people should continue to absorb. There's only 130,000 policemen in this country. It's a tiny number, and it's a it's the sort of numbers that you it's the sort of numbers that you acquire to police a peaceful society. I think I worked it out to one policeman to every 532 people. And when you have a peaceful society, that's enough. Because the rest of society sort of backs up the police force because there are norms that everybody follows. And all the police are there to do is to take care of those people who really won't play by the rules. But now we've got a situation where um, out of those 532 people compared to one policeman, it seems as if potentially 400 of those people are now in the sights of the one policeman. So 400 out of those 532 are now potential criminals to be viewed with extreme prejudice by the authorities. Um, of course, out of that 400, 350 of those people will be completely asleep. So there's only 50. And is that enough? Is that enough to resist? I think it is. I think it is enough. It's not ideal, but I think that is enough. Even though the remaining 132 people will be protected by the police. So we've got this situation. We've got a large um, aggressive population of a certain demographic, a certain faith, who refuse to play by the rules, who refuse to follow the rules. And the police can't cope with them. You know, it's becoming clear now that the reason that they've been appeasing them for so long is they've been desperately trying to keep a lid on them, and so long as they can keep a lid on that, they will um, they can maintain the image of some sort of control. But too many people have noticed now. Um, I mean, it should have blown this wide open with the grooming gangs, but it didn't. Um, the level of compliance uh, of people during COVID would also have emboldened them, I suppose. And they will kid themselves that this recent crackdown is will have changed everything. Right, we've got the population under control now. You know, we sent an 18-year-old to jail for 2 years for something he said, or for standing around while there was a riot going on. We've arrested middle-aged housewives just to let any you know bold members of the middle class know that we're going to go after them as well, and they will kid themselves that now that they've quelled the riot, so to speak, um, that now it's all changed. Now this is how we're going to go from now on. This is it. We've sorted it now. But are the victims of the July the 7th bombing, um, are they alive now, or are they still dead? And the London Bridge attacks, and the Borough Market attacks, and the Manchester Arena attacks, you know, are they alive again, or are they still dead? Is poor Lee Rigby's head still on his shoulders, or not? Have there been hundreds of thousands of raped children in towns across the northern England, Are they, you know, are they still victims, or are they okay now? Have we all forgotten about that? Are they now okay now? Has the mass migration stopped? Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, and they are kidding themselves if they think that they've put this back in the box. And there are certain places now which are the hallmarks of a disintegrating society that's disintegrating into internecine sectarian civil war. You know, areas of Birmingham, if not Birmingham as a whole. I don't know, I've not been there, but some of those videos that we've seen of mobs turning up and beating up people in pubs, and them smashing up cars with people still in them, and taking over, massive roundabouts, and making a racetrack of the roundabout with all their Audi RS6s and stuff screaming around the roundabout. I mean, these are places that no non-white person is going is, no white person is going to want to go to. Anyway, in fact, no non-Muslim is going to want to go there. You wouldn't go there willingly, you know. I mean, it's probably even the case that, I mean, I don't know what sect that the Pakistani Muslims follow. I think they're Sunnis, aren't they? So even if you were a Shia Muslim, you probably wouldn't even go to that area of Birmingham now. So that area of Birmingham is theirs now. The police have said they can police themselves. And if you drive through there in your car and they decide that, that, that they don't like the look of you, they can smash your car up. And maybe worse. And the police won't help you. The police won't help because there's only 130,000 of them. I mean, I haven't checked figures, but my feeling is there's more Muslims in Birmingham than there are police in the entire country. And then people say, well, we should bring the army in. The army? The army's pathetic. There's only 80,000 people in the army. I mean, sure, they're heavily armed, but they won't be able to do anything. You know, in Northern Ireland in the 70s, the British Army, you know, probably the most professional army in the world, or one of the most professional armies in the world, was kept on the back foot for 10 years by essentially probably only a few thousand IRA terrorists. So I don't think that Elon Musk is very far off the mark when he talks about civil war. You know, we really are in some serious shit here, you know. And you know, on the other hand, sometimes I just think I'm just too immersed in this stuff. I mean, here I am sitting next to the field at the back of my house, and you know there are no Muslim riots going on here. There's no far right riots going on here. There's no. But to me, it sounds like it's only a matter of time. And you know, I look at you know, my fellow citizens where I live, and they seem to walk. Maybe they have the same fears as I do. Maybe some of them do, I'm sure, but most of them just sort of think it's just something that's happening over there. You know, it's nothing to do with us. It's you know, it's just one of those things. And I think it is a genuine denial of reality. But then, of course, the argument is maybe I'm in denial of reality. That maybe this is my reality, and I'm focusing on something which is not actually real. I mean, I haven't seen any riots. You know, I've just seen it on my computer screen. You know, I saw riots during COVID. You know, well, they weren't really riots, but you know, what constitutes a riot. You know, the definition of that will probably get changed as well. So, you know, it's pointless trying to define it. So maybe I am too focused on this stuff, and maybe I should just relax a bit, and maybe I should take a page out of other people's book and just pretend that it isn't happening. And I suppose if you pretend hard enough, up until the moment it actually comes to your door, you can continue to pretend it isn't happening. They say that 3.5% is the crucial percentage of dedicated people who can affect change. The 80% of the 80%, the 80% they'll just go do what they always do, which is almost nothing. And so, whilst in a way that's encouraging that it only takes 3.5% of people to resist and to effect change, and even to win, that goes both ways. It only takes 3.5% of people to fuck everything up. And all those virtue signalling wankers that turned out supposedly to oppose the far right are the people. They are the 3.5% that will fuck everything up. And they pat themselves on the back. They're the good people. Jesus. I mean, there are other things worth considering. Um, the fact that Starmer has reached for the totalitarian kosh as his first resort rather than the last one is telling. It's a bit like Justin Trudeau. He's hit the nuclear option, first off, which of course means he's got nowhere else to go now. The draconian crackdown, will stop some people, um, but it won't stop everyone. And the way this is framed is so dispiriting too, as well. The way the establishment of supposedly, you know, um, kind of engendered this, you know, anti anti-fascist, anti-racist far, opposition to the far right, to to create an enemy, and of course what they've done is they've deliberately created an enemy of what they consider to be the underclass, which is the working class, and just the working class who basically don't have fuck all, and often the people who don't have fuck all, the people who will go out and riot because they, you know, in the worst interpretation, they don't have anything better to do, and in the best interpretation, is because they've got nothing else to lose. But it's so dispiriting because so many people, you know, myself included, have spent ages trying to convince people that we're not racist, and that it's ridiculous to assume that we are, that we have uh, valid concerns about what's happening, and they've just managed to paint us all as racist in the eyes of many. If anybody knew anything about me personally, they would know how ridiculous that is. Um, and I'm sure it's the same for many others. And of course, what I'm afraid of is that there are going to be real personal human tragedies in this, um, and because the smear has been so broad, they're far right racists. Look at them, all those gammon working class shaven-headed morons. They're all just, they're the enemy. They're the people we've got to go for. So the what will happen is that the broad backlash will respond in kind, and so quite responsible and respectable and moral, upstanding immigrants and children of immigrants will just be swept aside. You know, he's black. Let's get him. Yeah, that is what's going to happen. It's just, and people uh, who have been trying to support this country, even though they might be black or brown or whatever it is, will just be swept aside now because it's a them and us situation. And these include friends of mine, and I can see this tragedy unfolding. A high profile example is that of Majid Nawaz. He's a man I have enormous respect for. I think he's one of the bravest men in the country. And one of the reasons I admire him so much is that he was, when the scandal of the grooming gangs came out, instead of doing what so many people said, which was immediately just say, well, it's not all Muslims, it's not all Muslims, it's not all Muslims, which of course it isn't, but instead of saying that, and um, instead of trying to deflect by saying, well, what about the Catholic Church, eh? What about that? And saying things like most rapists are white, which is also true. And most shamefully of all was when they said, when they started trying to blame the girls themselves or the families, well, we're their mothers and all the rest of it, as if it was their bloody fault. He could have said that. He could have said that to protect himself, but he didn't. He said the grooming gangs are largely populated by Pakistani men, Muslim men like me, and he's the only person I know who said that. And he didn't try to run away from that. And that time that he was mugged outside the LBC studios, and he was mugged by a couple of white blokes, I think. And instead of focusing on the fact that he was mugged by a couple of white blokes, he said that white people came to his aid. Yeah, he didn't have to say that. but he did. And when he was, in the early days of the EDL, the English Defence League, as it existed, which it hasn't done for at least a decade, um, he was the only person who reached out to Tommy Robinson when nobody else would touch him. Nobody else would go near him, and he did. Not to agree with him. He challenged him, and I believe it was. I believe he was instrumental in persuading Tommy to disband it. I don't know for certain, but that seems to be what happened. Um, and so, and he would have got shit for that from his own side, from the Muslim side, and also from the wanker lefty white middle class types as well. Um, so he has real political courage to do things like that, and he, his capacity for inclusion, real inclusion and um, a harmonious society seems infinite. You know, but now he's being put into an impossible position, and he's now lashing out. And it's most unlike him. Um, he's had a pop at Lawrence Fox and Calvin Robinson, who've both um, made increasingly strident uh, remarks about Islam as a whole, which is understandable, I believe. But um, you know, Martin Nawaz is in an impossible position. He can't, completely throw all his fellow Muslims under the bus. But instead of, um, in the recent Israel-Palestine thing, he hasn't. He's tried to focus on the figure of Netanyahu as being the villain of the piece. Um, and I've heard him say, make, I've heard him uh, say some very conciliatory things and inclusive things about British Jews, calling them my Jewish brothers. Now, and he's quite explicit about that. And so in the Israel-Palestine thing, he's questioned Netanyahu, and he says that Netanyahu is exploiting the situation, or that even he might be the instigator of the whole attacks in the first place, in order to exploit the situation. Now, I don't know the truth of that or not, but I mean, the fact that he hasn't just labelled it as a genocide, as so many others have, suggests something else, and that he even from that perspective, he's fostering a more nuanced take on it. Um, when so many others have just said, well, it's the Jews, it's the Israelis, it's a fucking genocide, and we're not going to speak to anybody who doesn't agree that it's a complete genocide. Um, so um, he doesn't take the easy path, um, and it's probably true to say that whatever relationship he might have had with Tommy Robinson has just been kind of swept away along with the blood of those three English girls. It's and he's attacked Tommy and Tommy's attacked him, and who knows the truth of these things. Um, but that's just a sort of high-profile tragedy of one person who's trying to do the right thing, and I do believe he is trying to do the right thing. Some people say I'm a dupe for believing him because he's a Muslim, and all this of it. Well, they're entitled to think that. Um, and then others will say, well, he's justified because, Tommy's a Mossad plant, a Mossad asset, or whatever it is. You know, yeah, maybe that's true as well. I don't know. Who knows? But that's just one example of somebody who's going to end up getting thrown under the bus by both sides. And like I say, he's responding in an uncharacteristic way because he's kind of cornered, and I feel for him, you know, as I feel for Tommy. They're renewing the attacks on him. Renewing them with a vengeance, in the truest sense of the word, with a vengeance. And judging by the comments of so many of the sort of lefty liberals, I think we underestimate how much vengeance is is the reason for so much of what they're doing. I mean, it might even be vengeance for Brexit. They've never got over that, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if we end up dragged back into Europe, you know, on the condition that we ditch the pound and adopt a digital euro for the cashless society. It's like I say, we're in serious trouble here. You know, and of course there are lots of people saying, and Margin was, included, saying that we will, this is um, all part of the plan to foment rights so they can crack down and introduce their digital ID in the cashless society. Well, yes, I'm sure that's the case, and people are talking about it, thinking they're so clever, saying, "Well, you're just falling into their trap," um, and there's some truth in that. But do we think that they won't try to introduce the digital ID in the cashless society if we don't object, if we don't protest, if we don't resist and fight back? All that means is we'll get another couple of years before it comes in. I mean, perhaps this is an accelerant, but either we get killed slowly or we get killed quickly or enslaved quickly. And I mean, the people who say, "Well, oh, you shouldn't get involved because you're falling into their trap," what do you think? What do they think that we should do? It's like when people said that you shouldn't go to the. It was a trap to go to the cenotaph on on Remembrance Day. You're falling into their trap. Well, okay, well, it's a trap, you know. But what's the alternative? The alternative is that you don't go and you get a load of scumbags defecating on the cenotaph, because that will show them, won't it? My real fear is that we will slide into totalitarianism before, and people won't recognise it for what it is, and it will dawn on them very slowly. It will dawn on them very slowly, and they will make excuses for it. Oh well, it's just rioting, it's this disorder. You got to stamp on it. And you can't have people saying things like that, saying whatever they want. And if only people would be a bit more responsible in their speech, then maybe we could have freedom of speech. But as everybody's so hateful and everybody's a racist, then maybe we can't have it, and maybe that's a good thing. And then one day they'll find that they really need to say something. They really need to, and they won't be allowed to. I mean, tyrannies don't last forever, but they can last for a lifetime. And the other thing is, it's fucking cowardly not to resist it. It's fucking cowardly. I mean, we saw this during COVID. People just go along to get along. And I believe I did the right thing during COVID. And I believe I'm doing the right thing in doing these videos. I mean, it's not much. I mean, it's not. I'm not bringing down the government or anything, am I? It's like it's only what I can do, and I can only try and persuade and try to bring about change by force of argument. I mean, it's all I can do really, and particularly with a supine population. But sadly, 80% of my compatriots, as 80% of everybody everywhere, will just go along to get along. And of course, it's not the 80% never change anything. You know, the 80% are sheep. They're sheep, and they're not very intelligent, and most, well, I have to say it, most of them are pretty cowardly. And I don't like to say that. I don't like to say it. But people don't stand up because they're afraid. They're afraid of the government. Yeah, but what we have to remember is that Starmer is quite obviously an extremely weak man. Because weak men are attracted to the idea of doing something violent. He's not tackling the far right rioters himself, but he's got this apparatus of people who can do it for him. A strong man would talk to them. A strong man would go down to the riots, would turn up at the Southport riots at the head of the police and say, "Come on, let's talk about this." You know, but of course we don't have that, and we haven't had that for years. You know, um, I mean, the irony is, I'm sitting here tearing myself to knots over this, and other people are sleeping soundly in their beds. But maybe that isn't right. Maybe that isn't right. Maybe what it is that they know something's wrong. The ordinary peoples, the normies, the 80%. Maybe they know something's wrong, but they don't want to say so. They don't even want to admit it to themselves. So, I mean, I've got to be bolder in talking to other people rather than talking to you guys. I've got to be bolder about speaking to people who just going to think they're just going to think I'm just unreasonably obsessed and focused on all this stuff when really I should just be, why don't you come and enjoy your life, mate? You know, don't worry about it. It's all right, it's fine. But my belief is that some people react like that. Some people react by making you feel stupid. But I think if you talk to a significant amount of people, they will a significant amount of them will open the gates for them. It will open, in a way, open their mind to think about things that was probably at the back of their mind anyway, but they dare not articulate it. They dare not accept it. I mean, I've had experience of this with a couple of friends recently, and sometimes you have to focus on what you think is most worrying to them. Yeah, one of my friends, it is the immigration. Yeah, and he's asked me a few questions which tell me he's thinking about it. You know, and I imagine that he's thinking about it, but it's the sort of thing that he can't be public about it for obvious reasons, but he's thinking about it. But we do have to talk to people. I mean, opinions change slowly, um, but I feel confident enough to say that there was no pandemic. I feel confident enough to say that to people now, and I'll get raised eyebrows, but I don't get laughed at. You know, which is progressive of a kind, I suppose. Um, and the two things I think we really have to remember while all this shit is going on is that, firstly, that there's only 130,000 police in this country, and essentially they are in irrelevance. They talk a big game with the police, but there's nothing to them really. Um, and the threat to bring in the army is nonsense. And the other thing is that Starmer is an astonishingly weak man. It's quite obvious from the way he behaves. So we have to focus on those two things and not be downhearted, which is not always easy, but it's what you need if you want to stay free.